Welcome back to another episode of Live with Laura. I'm your host, Laura Hettiger, and friends, we are in the middle of March Madness. It has been narrowed to 16 teams. The intensity, the pressure, and the moments only get bigger from here. It is such an exciting time. And if you are a big basketball fan or even a casual basketball fan, I'm sure you notice someone important for each team. Of course, that is the head coach. What is it like being a coach during the season, especially during a big playoff run? What are these coaches experiencing, and how do they handle all of it? I don't know, but we are about to find out with someone who has a huge connection not only to the game of basketball, but to St. Louis. I am so excited to be joined by Coach Bruce Weber. Coach Weber, it's good to see you, sir.
It's great to be on with you. Thank you. I appreciate you having me part of this, especially with March Madness going on.
So I specifically wore my Illini orange today because longtime viewers know I went to the University of Illinois. I was in the seats at the Dome when you were coaching the Fighting Illini for the national championship. I cheered for the Illini, so it truly is such an honor to sit here with you.
Well, I don't remember you cheering, but my daughter did cheer, so we have a lot of connections there. And, it was a really special time for our family to be part of that, and especially the 05 run, back-to-back Big Ten championships, the Sweet 16, and then obviously playing in the national championship in St. Louis was really, really special.
And we are going to get into all those details because, Coach Weber, it's been a while since you were at Illinois. You then went to Kansas State. Since retired from coaching, I had no idea until a coworker 4 weeks ago said, "Did you know Coach Weber now lives in St. Louis?" And I said, "Are you kidding me?" So would you please update our viewers on what life is like for you and what brought you to St. Louis?
Well, we had two daughters there, not the one that cheered, but and grandkids, and so my wife and I were coming back and forth. My wife was helping quite a bit, and then during COVID, one of my daughters worked at Barnes, and she was going into the hospital, and we were going to help. So we just thought, instead of staying at the house, we should just get a condo, just to have some place to kind of hang out and be there. And now you don't have to sleep at the house. So that's what we did. And we're a couple miles away from her in Webster Groves. We loved it. We're right on Lockwood. It's been a blast. And one of the daughters did leave now, moved to Kansas City. We have another in Dallas. So right now I do a little bit with the Big Ten Network, obviously during the season, but I think our main job is just helping as grandparents and then trying to enjoy life as much as possible.
And you have such a big smile on your face as you talk about your three girls and your grandkids. How many grandkids do you have?
5 grandkids. And ironically, I went through 3 daughters, and now we have 4 boys of the 5. But the girl, she's the feistiest one of all of them, and she definitely holds her own when they all get together.
Do you see any of them being basketball players?
Yeah, they like it. They play all sports. In fact, we just had the 2 of them down for spring break. We did everything from volleyball to soccer to baseball to swimming. They do it all right now. And I think it's so important for young people, kids that age, to play a lot of sports, find out what they have an interest in. And I just think so many parents push too hard, and get the kids involved in just one sport, and then they don't develop athletically. I think it hurts them overall, and that's just my viewpoint. Obviously, everyone has different viewpoints, but I was a teacher, I was a coach for a long, long time, and I think if you keep kids positive, enjoying sport, they're going to have a much better career in the long run.
And let's talk about your career specifically. You grew up in Milwaukee?
Yes, born and raised in Milwaukee, part of a family, five kids, 3 boys, two girls. Dad was a tough cookie. There's no doubt about that. He was really hard on us. He actually is an immigrant. He came over from Austria with my parents right before World War II hit, and So we have just a lot of fond memories of Milwaukee and growing up. A small house, 3 boys in one room, 2 girls in the other, and my parents in the other. And we didn't have a whole lot, but we had caring parents who loved us, a great school system, and we had sports, and that was our main life. Everyone in the family were teachers and coaches. That was my dad's whole thing, was that make sure if you go into teaching and coaching, you're helping somebody. And at that time, he always said, you have your summers off, but that doesn't happen anymore. The summers as a coach, you're really busy, but so my first job was as a 5th grade teacher, and I was coaching high school, and then I had a whim to be a college coach, and obviously it worked out. Brothers and sisters taught and coached. My older brother's in the Wisconsin High School Hall of Fame. My younger brother Dave coached John Shire, the Duke coach at Glenbrook North, and he's in the Illinois High School Hall of Fame. The sisters were also teachers and coaches, and so that pretty much was all of our lives.
It's in the Weber blood. So let's talk about how you did make the change from coaching and teaching in 5th grade to getting the inkling of going to the college level. What did that look like?
It was a dream, to be honest. And I always say I was kind of a miracle to have that opportunity. It's really hard to get into college basketball, the college sports, unless you played the game. And, the ends to knowing people in that. And my younger brother was actually a really good player. He was being recruited. A coach named Bob Gottlieb. You might hear of Doug Gottlieb, it was his son, and now he's the coach at Green Bay, but he was mainly a broadcaster. But Bob was the coach at UWM. They recruit my brother. They come over, hang out at our house all the time, and he just asked me, and I said, he knew I was coaching high school basketball. I said, I'd love to be a grad assistant. He made a couple calls. He was connected with Coach Cady, Gene Cady, and he was at Western Kentucky at the time. And I had applied to every grad school trying to be a grad assistant. And, finally, Coach Gottlieb got me connected. And I've told this story many times. I drove 9 hours to interview with Coach Cady, and I get there and he wasn't there. He not only was not there, but he was not in town. He was out of the country, and he forgot about me. And the next week I called. I was working a camp, actually Rick Majerus's camp, and I just said, Coach, I drove down there. He said, oh, I'm sorry. He goes, come on down again. I said, hey, it's 9-hour drive. You either hired me or not. And he hired me, and I ended up being with Coach Cady for 19 years as his assistant. And it's I said a miracle. It's a funny story. Here you don't even meet the man, and you end up with him for 19 years. And he was so important, and obviously my wife and our life, our family's life, and I learned so much from him. So it's I'm just so fortunate to be in college basketball for 45 years and be around some really great people, great programs. And, to me, it's about the players and all the relationships. And that goes back for me 50 years ago, still communicating with guys that we coached way back in, 79, 80.
I'm so glad you mentioned Coach Cady early in this conversation, because that is something I definitely wanted to dive into. You weren't alone on his coaching staff. He has had so many amazing assistant coaches. Matt Painter, who's Purdue Boilermakers are doing pretty good this year. Quanzo Martin. Also, Tom Izzo credits a lot of what he knows back to Gene Cady. What are some of the life lessons you learned from him?
Well, it's funny because Tom Izzo and I both started. Tom was with Coach Heathcote Judd, and Coach Cady were really good friends. So Tom and I, anytime one would do something crazier we thought than the other, we'd call each other, and we've had a great relationship. We still stay in contact quite a bit. I was really, a couple of weeks ago, Michigan State played at Purdue. Tom took the time on the day of the game, went and saw a coach. It was really, really cool moment. They called, and so you appreciate that Tom appreciates coach and the older coaches. But you learn so much. It's about the players, and I still always I talk about this all the time when I speak about leadership. I was a young coach. I was mad at a player. And coach would get madder than anybody at players. And, it was kind of the old school Gene Katie. But he could tell I was mad at a player, and I wasn't even talking to him. And he called me in one day and he said, yeah, I heard you're mad at Ryan. I said, yeah, coach, he's a knucklehead. He did this and that. And he goes, I just want to have one question for you. He said, who's the adult and who's the kid? And I just put my head down and I said, it's me. And he said, well, and it's something I learned and I tried to emphasize to our coaches, assistants that's coming through, and I still do, you can get mad at guys, but you are their coach. They need you. They need your help. And I went and talked to him. He ended up having a great career. I had a great relationship. And I actually saw him last summer. Purdue had a big reunion, former players. And, we just laughed about some of those moments. But, those are just some of the things Coach was really hard on the players, but he loved them. He cared about them. They still care about him. And, that it's so important when you are coaching them that you care about them more than just as a player and how they're helping you, that they're also, that you care about them as a person and what their life's going to be about. And that's one thing. Hopefully I did. I'm sure I wasn't perfect, but I always tried to be involved in their lives and helping them even way beyond their basketball careers at our schools.
And I think that's so key because some, of course, make it to the NBA, which is amazing. Some go on to be coaches because of motivators like you. But I would imagine overwhelmingly the majority of the players you coach go on to have kind of regular jobs. But the life lessons they learn on and off the court from those great coaches go on in whatever industry they decide to go into.
Yeah, I have guys, we have guys that were one's CEOs of companies, congressmen, all different kinds of works. And they'll call back and they'll say, Coach, remember this. And I don't remember that. And you helped me with this. And they're like, oh, if I did, great. So we just laugh about it. We always had a quote of the day. Coach Katie started it. We all do it, a thought of the day. And it has usually nothing to do with basketball. Some of my favorites are like, if nothing changes, nothing changes, and it's kind of a, funny saying, but if you don't change, something doesn't change, nothing's going to change. You're going to continue to have the same outcome, so you're no better than the people around you, just things like that. And I'll get random texts, random calls, and they'll, hey, how about, you remember this? I just used this quote, with my people that I work with, and so they remember, and you do have an impact on them. And we talk all the time about act the right way, treat people the right way, and play the game the right way, and you're going to have a good life, and it's going to help you. And Coach Katie's, and this is for me the sad part of now college basketball, one of his main things he taught all of us was loyalty. And and right now, obviously, the kids are transferring. I think you're losing. I heard Lon Kruger. I was on with him the other day. He talked about we're losing so many life lessons that as we came up as players, as coaches, that we're losing now because you're only having these players for 9 months. You don't develop those relationships, and it makes it difficult to have as much impact on the players. But I know the players appreciated it, and I probably get a call or two every day from somebody, and a lot of times they're coaches. I talked to Brad Korn yesterday. Obviously, it's the SEMO coach. He was a player for us at SIU. He's my assistant at Kansas State. Kent Williams just won the state. He texted me and sent me a bunch of videos at this Met. Brian Turner is a coach at St. Mary's High School. Just, when you get those callbacks, you feel good that you had something to do with their life and helping them.
And I'm glad you mentioned the change quote. Nothing changes if nothing changes. Everything, it does seem like, has changed in college sports really over just the last few years. You mentioned the loyalty aspect. What do you think it would be like if you were still coaching in this new NIL era?
I think you still care about the players, and you see it. I think you brought up Matt Painter, and I recruited Matt. I coached him. He was my assistant at SIU. We still stay in touch, a lot. But Matt has been able to navigate this. Obviously, his players are getting paid. They wouldn't stay there because they'd have other opportunities. But he still has been able to keep those 3 seniors for 4 years, other players for 2 or 3 years. He treats them right. Tom Izzo, you brought up Tom, and Tom has been able to navigate it and keep his guys and still have success. So you got to work. Matt Painter's had to pick a player here or there to help with his team. Tom Izzo has, but you still can keep the guys there, treat them right, care about them. It's just, I think, part of it. But I think if you're as a coach, and I tell our guys all the time, it's just not about stats. You're looking in that portal, you got to make sure they were in a good program, where they coached hard, were they held accountable, did they win? All those things besides stats are really, really important. And there's a lot of teams that are not playing in the Sweet 16 this weekend that had the biggest budgets in the country. And because the guys they got weren't the right mix, didn't play their roles, didn't understand it. So I still think that part of it is important.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Sweet 16. 21 years ago, the Fighting Illini were in the Sweet 16 just outside of Chicago. I'm guessing you have some pretty fond memories of that time.
Oh, there's no doubt. Obviously, one of the most talked about games ever, the Arizona game. My mom had just passed at the Big Ten tournament. There were so much, storylines. We were undefeated till the last game of the year. We're 2 possessions. We had the most wins in the history of the NCAA, and at that time, and really two possessions from perfection. The Ohio State game, last game of the year, we led on basically the whole game, and kid hit a shot, a 3 to beat us at the buzzer. And then obviously the Carolina game in the national championship, we had a couple shots to either tie or win. So, but that Arizona game, it's hard to explain. Every time we get to March, I'm getting the calls to get some shows and talk about it. But, a lot of fond memories for Illini fans. Arizona, I was on an Arizona podcast the other day, and they say it's one of the worst nightmares all time of Arizona Wildcat fans. So, and Coach Olson was a great coach. I got to know him more after we actually played, and just part of Nike coaching tours and excursions that we had through the Nike Corporation. And, he only brought it up one time, but he always said, I'm just happy it was you guys that beat us and not somebody else. But, it's just crazy how that game to think about how you come back in such a short period of time, the overtime, the crowd, the noise. I mean, Jay Billis said it the other day on some broadcast. It was probably the most exciting game he ever broadcast. So, if he remembers it 20 some years or whatever ago, I'm sure a lot of other people do also.
We sure do. So, friends, we are going to take a trip down memory lane with Coach Bruce Weber right when we come back. You are watching Live with Laura. Welcome back to Live with Laura. I'm your host, Laura Hettiger, joined by longtime NCAA basketball coach Bruce Weber, who now actually lives in the St. Louis area. He has since retired from coaching, lives in Webster Groves. One of his daughters is in the Kirkwood area. And what a treat that he is giving us so much of his time as we are in the heart of March Madness. So, Coach Weber, to get this part of the conversation going, who do you think is going to win this year?
I don't know. I'm just happy there's 6 Big Ten teams in the Sweet 16. It's really cool. Obviously, I'm cheering for the Big Ten. I was part of that for 27 years. My time at Illinois, all the years at Purdue, now with the Big Ten Network, another 4 years, and grew up in Wisconsin. So it's been a long time since a Big Ten team has won the national championship. So I'm just hoping one of those guys are cutting down the nets in a couple weeks. And it's this weekend has been different. Obviously we talked about NIL, we talked about portal, the mid majors. Are there ever going to be a mid major getting to the Sweet 16 again? We did it at SIU a couple times, my group, and then Chris Lowry a couple of years later. So it'll be interesting. It's definitely changed, but I think the tournament was still great. Some really, really good games. One of my favorites was the Nebraska Vanderbilt game, and I was cheering for Coach Hoiberg and his son and their family and their team. It was great to see that ball bounce off the hoop, and they got the advance to the 16.
Mm-hmm. That has been a fun storyline. My husband is from Nebraska and is diehard Huskers. I hate to tell you this, though. He actually went to Kansas, so it's still very hard for me.
Well, they're not there anymore.
I know. I'm not too upset about that. But anyway, let's move on.
Me either.
I love that smile on your face. Let's go back to 2005. It was such a special time. Of course, the University of Illinois, the Fighting Illini, got the number 1 seed. And you know better than anyone, because you were the number 1 seed, you never had to travel far. I would imagine each site you went to almost felt like you were back home in Assembly Hall with how much orange was in the stands.
Yeah, it was amazing. There's no doubt about it. All year, actually, we played games at Iowa, and there would be more Illinois fans there than Iowa fans. And I think one of the years they actually stopped selling tickets at Hawkeye Arena. So Carver Hawkeye, so that our fans couldn't buy tickets, and they just put black tarps out so that our fans couldn't have the tickets. But that was one of I was always looking for something to motivate them. Obviously, you're undefeated. We're winning by big margins. But one of the things was be the number 1 seed, and we had a T-shirt. I did a lot of T-shirts, motivational T-shirts. And one of them was bust to the Final Four, and we bust to Indy, bust to Chicago, bust to St. Louis, and that doesn't happen very often. And it was, it was just amazing. You couldn't go out on the streets, to be honest, because there were just so many Illini fans, and just some great memories. Obviously, some funny stories along the way, but. But it was a lot easier to have your home fans there the whole time.
So you started off that season, from what I remember, preseason number 5. Did you feel like that was a low ranking going into that season?
Yeah, I probably did. Our guys took it more, they took the motivation a little more than I did. You had to prove it. You got to win games. We won the Big Ten the year before. We had went to the Sweet 16 that year, lost to Duke in a hard-fought game. J.J. Redick, so they had a pretty good team with Coach K. We had basically everyone back, and so we thought, hey, we definitely should be number 1, and. We had that chance. We played one of the most memorable games I was ever part of. We played Chris Ball and Wake Forest. They were number 1. It was the ACC Big Ten Challenge. It was in Assembly Hall. And not only did we won, but we won by a big margin. And I always tell this story. There was an official, a referee, Steve Welmer, was a great guy. He always talked to the players. He was really good to get along with. But midway through the second half, I heard somebody yell Weber, and I looking around, and then I heard it again, Weber, and I look around, it's the official, and he goes, hey, look at the scoreboard, and I did, and we were up 37. He goes, sit down and please enjoy this. So they were number 1. After that we became number 1, and the legend of that team just goes from there.
I was at that game. I was a senior in high school. My mom pulled me out of school that day so we could make it to Champaign in time. I don't think maybe I had more of a voice than you did after that game, but it might have been pretty close. I think I was hyperventilating during it. What was so special about that team, though, is not only you had good players, you had some huge personality players on that team.
Yes. And I talk about it all the time, and I talked about it then. It started with D. Brown. The shirt pop, showing the schools.
Mm-hmm.
He started that. The headband, the mouth guard, the high socks. He did all this. If you think about name, image, and likeness, you couldn't afford D. Brown in this day and age. Because he would have been everywhere. He was on the cover of every magazine. But the ironic thing is Darren Williams probably was our best player. And then, the other thing is they played so well together. They didn't care about notoriety. I mean, everyone has their ego, but one of the things we had, I did a thing. I put a pretend box out, or a box, and I put the ego box outside the locker room. And supposedly they were supposed to take their ego out and put it in the box every time they came into the gym. And they really played without an ego. Darren Williams was the third, fourth leading scorer on the team, but he was the third pick in the draft. So it kind of shows you how good we were, how they played together. It's just fun to coach them. At that time, they had never really talked about assists per field goal. And those guys shared the basketball so well, passing to each other. And one game was Darren's game, the next it was Luther's, then it was James Augustine, D, whoever it was. And that's what made us so hard to play against.
And while it was so amazing for you professionally, as you got closer and closer to the kickoff of the NCAA tournament, your personal family suffered a huge tragedy.
Yeah, my mom passed at the Big Ten tournament. The first game, I remember my wife came to the press conference, and I looked. She had never been to a press conference in all the years, and we'd been married a long time. And I what are you doing here? And she just said, as soon as you're done, I got to talk to you. And they had already taken my mom. She was at the game. They'd taken her over to Rush, and so we were trying to get over there. I didn't get a chance to see her again. I still remember right before the tournament, it was the last time I talked to her, and she said, this has been a fairy book story. Because we were on everything. If you remember, it didn't matter. We had media chasing us. We had fans chasing us, waiting outside the practice facility, hotels, movie theaters, wherever we went. It was great, but it was a little overwhelming. But she just said, I see you on TV, every channel I turn on. And my dad had passed years before, but I still remember saying that she wishes, my dad would have been, because he would have been so proud to watch this. So it was a special time, but a really hard time. I think it almost brought our players together a little bit, to see, to help see me go through the emotions and, bring you back to maybe like there's more to life than basketball. And it kind of helped us, the loss at the last game of the year and then seeing my mom pass maybe brought us a little closer together and helped us make the run through the NCAA tournament.
And it's just amazing the strength that you showed going through that, because I'm sure so many of your players, even though they were 21, 22-year-old big men, still saw you as a father figure. And then watching you go through this during the most intense, chaotic, overwhelming, exciting time professionally, that shows true grit and strength and grace on your part too.
Yeah, and it had a lot to do with my wife and Megan. She's been so important to me, and she was there helping through this. My brothers and sisters, they actually, they were all there in Chicago. They were at the games. They traveled with us also, most of the year, coming to games, nephews, nieces, my daughters, it just kind of the family. I think we all helped each other, helped us through it. It did add a whole different dynamic into it, just making funeral arrangements, all that type of stuff. And, it was hard. There's no doubt. But I think maybe I forgot about basketball a little bit because you talked about the stress of the tournament and what coaches go through. And, maybe it helped me refocus on some other things there as we entered into the tournament that week.
And then just 2 weeks later, you find yourself back in Chicago for the Sweet 16 and the infamous Arizona game. 21 years later, how often do you think about that game?
Well, definitely in March. I told you, everybody calls. Will you be on? Talk about the game. And, it's just, it always comes up. But every time I, see our former players or talk to former coaches, our guys that were with us on our staff, I would say, 50% of the time that game comes up somewhere in the conversation, and a lot of fans too. I do the BTN in Chicago. And I'll be walking through O'Hare, walking through Midway, and you always hear ILL, and then somebody will yell, Arizona game, I was there. I think everyone was there. It only held 20,000 people. There's no way they were all there. It's just, and people just come up and talk about it, that, random people that, aren't Illinois fans, that they watch that game. We'll be at the beach and sitting talking to people, and they'll bring it up about how they remember that game. So it impacted a lot of people, not just Illinois fans.
So many people just wanted Illinois to do so well. I think it was your team, which in my mind is kind of the cast of characters. This was a movie we all enjoyed, we loved, it was fun. You win the Arizona game, you get to the Final Four, and the best part, you could take a bus to St. Louis. And man, you know better than anyone, we are Tiger country, technically here on the Missouri side, but at that time, everyone wore orange.
Yeah, it was incredible. Obviously, we have the bragging rights game, always, just an amazing game. And I remember scouting it years ago. We could scout in person when I was at Purdue. Obviously, it was a great. Missouri was Norm Stewart at that time, Coach Henson at Illinois. I just couldn't believe the atmosphere, and then to be part of it. I tell people there's no other game like that in the country when both those teams are good quality teams. And so you have that ties with St. Louis, and coming back, and you mentioned, I was trying to distract the players, keep them relaxed all the way through. We did Dave and Buster's, bowling, whatever, and we were going to go bowling in Collinsville on the way down. And I told the people, we're going to come after business hours. We just want to be the only ones there. And they said, oh, no problem. We'll they were Illinois fans. Somebody did some research, and well, it did not happen. We had people waiting there. It was really hard. And no matter where we walked in St. Louis, I always tell the story after practice. You have this open practice, and which is just amazing. And I think it was the highest attended practice in the history of the Final Four. 30-some thousand people were at practice. You got a lot of media obligations after, and the players were tired. I just said, you guys go back, I'll walk back. We were staying, 6-7 blocks away from the dome. And I walked out of the back door of that dome, and there were Illini people everywhere. And I started doing autographs and that, but then it got to a point we were going to dinner. I wanted to get back. I ran. I started running. And I was a little younger then. I don't think I could do it now, but there were people chasing me down the street. And I look back, I still think it was a dream, but I've had other people tell me that they saw it happen. I got right near, it was the Marriott at the time, it's the Hilton Ballpark now. And I got right near there, and there was a red light, and I looked back and I'm thinking, I can't stop. So there was a police officer there. He just held up traffic. I ran right into the hotel, waved to people. And we had to have security guards. You talk about, we had to go through service elevators. The bus had to go underground. I mean, people were calling, saying they had room service for our players. We had to have guards on the floor. At Northwestern, we played that year. Near the end of the year, we tried to take them to a movie. They got a standing ovation in the theater. There are just so many stories that when you talked about the notoriety and publicity we got, and all our players, from Dee being the personality, Roger was the reverend, James Augustine, just a fun, happy-lucky guy, Darren just the third-round pick and a great player. Luther had his story and he had his troubles and came back. So he was the Chicago guy that made it. So it was just a lot of fun to be part of.
Let's talk about the national championship, the UNC game. What do you remember saying to the team before you walked out there on the court?
Well, to enjoy it, to take a deep breath. I told them before the Louisville game, when you get out there, look up, see all the crowd, say, hey, I'm part of this. But now look at the hoops. It's still a basketball court. You got to play basketball. You got to enjoy this. And, after Arizona game, we just crushed Louisville. Roger Powell, D had great games in that one. And then, the same thing with Carolina. And, Carolina, you got to give them credit. They probably played the best game of the year. Obviously, I hear it all the time. Beside Arizona, I hear about the officials in the Carolina game and James Augustine only playing 8 minutes. And, that's the tough part because I've seen it many times in articles get to March and interviewed articles that we were probably one of the best teams that didn't win the national championship on a given year. You always wonder. I tell this story quite a bit. After we were done, obviously we did a tour, signing autographs. I did a book, all that stuff. And, it was just still crazy with that. The players were, could go anywhere and sign autographs, all that. But a lady, I got this picture of a toilet, and I was just trying. I had my administrative assistant just kind of signing, tell me, look at this, this is, and I was like, I wasn't reading. There was literally hundreds to thousands of letters we were getting, in that time period. And I opened it, and there's a picture of the toilet, and I was like, what the heck is this? I got to read this. So I start reading the letter, and she says, look closer at the toilet. And she said, there's a gold plaque on it with the names of the 3 officials from the national championship game. So every time I sit down and do one and flush the toilet, I always think of those 3 officials. So it obviously it affected other people, the calls in that game.
I am just amazed. I mean, I like to think I'm a pretty big Illini fan, but I sure haven't done that. Think about the Golden Throne. Oh, my goodness. I'm glad you mentioned the officials because a week from right now, I'm going to be sitting down with Ed Hightower. And I have a feeling you and Ed know each other very well, a very long time NCAA official.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. And Ed obviously was very involved at SIU, part of the board for many years. Just a good man, great official. When I was young coming up, he was young coming up, in the Big Ten. We had him, many, many times. Obviously, then when I became a head coach, continued to have him and had a good relationship. And one of the best officials, of all time. There's no doubt about that. Final Four guy. Just did a great job. And he was more than that. Obviously, his involvement with SIU, Edwardsville school system, just so many things he did. And I don't know how he did it, to be honest, to do all the jobs he did, plus officiate, because those guys work hard. It's really hard. And I know people complain about him, but when you go back and watch film, usually they're right. It might have been a different angle, and the problem is, and I like the new challenge rule in college basketball, the NBA. I wish they would be able to do a challenge with a foul, especially maybe down the stretch, because you hate games to end on plays that could have gone a different way. But they do a great job, and they're so important. And one of our biggest crises in college basketball, in general, is getting officials. It's such a hard job. No one wants to do it. Even at the younger ages, I go to my grandkids, first grade, second grade games, and parents are yelling at the official, and these guys are getting $9 to do a game or something, and they're just trying to help. And every kid travels, everyone double dribbles. It's just so hard. And I'm like, why do you want to get tortured? We'll be at camps. I have camps going, and you have team camps, and the parents are there yelling at these guys, and they're officiating games from 9 o'clock in the morning till 9 at night, and you're going to miss calls, and it's hard, but it's definitely something that is it's important to our game. We need them, and I hope fans understand that they're not perfect. Players aren't perfect, coaches aren't perfect, and but they're an important part of the game.
And I appreciate hearing that empathy from you as a basketball coach, recognizing no one is perfect. And Dr. Hightower, when I told him you were coming on, this is a quote, he said, "Coach Weber is one of the finest persons of the highest integrity."
Well, I appreciate that. And, it's something that, I took to heart. That when I got in the game, obviously everyone didn't do it right, recruiting wise, dealing with their players, with their, dealing with administration, fans, all that stuff. For me, when I got to a program, I gave everything, heart and soul to them, tried to do it the right way. My wife and I always talked about, we don't want our girls opening up the paper and my name in the headline for something that, I did wrong, and to be a great example for them and for our players, and that's what and my parents too. So that was really important how I was raised and how we tried to raise our girls.
Well, they did a great job with you. We are going to find out so much more about your girls and what life is like for Coach Weber today, and also get some life advice from him after this next commercial break. We are thrilled that you are joining us for Live with Laura. We have a few more moments together here with Coach Bruce Weber. He is now a Webster Groves guy after coaching at SIU, the University of Illinois, and Kansas State. Coach Weber, I have a funny story for you. You have 3 daughters. I fall between your oldest 2. It was October of 2007. I was a receptionist at Ubben, the basketball facility on U of I's campus. My job was literally to sit there and just basically show donors where to go as they were writing their checks. That's how it was explained to me. Be pleasant, be polite, but basically I got paid to do my homework. So one day I'm sitting there smiling, happy in my U of I gear, and this nice gentleman comes in and he goes, "Hey, is your dad excited about basketball season?" Again, this is October of 2007. I go, I guess he is. And he goes, "You guess? What do you mean?" I go, "Well, actually, my dad likes football better than basketball." He goes, "Your dad likes football better than basketball?" I'm like, "Yeah, he's always been a football guy, but, he likes basketball too. He goes to the games." He goes, "Are you Bruce Weber's daughter?" And I said, "No, sir. No, I am not." And he said, "Thank God, because I didn't know how you were sitting here telling me that the head coach doesn't like basketball." So I do apologize. I hope that donor still wrote a big fat check to the program.
Oh, that's funny. It's a good story. And, our girls, I would raise, the 3 girls, or my wife and I, Megan, she raised them. I didn't raise them, but just really proud of them. And I guess you definitely could look like one of them. Somebody could make that mistake. There's no doubt about that. But one of the things, I was not around much. My wife, Megan, she was actually an OB nurse. She delivered babies for 15 years. I'm not sure how she did it, raising the kids, because I was not around much. They called me Ghost Daddy at times, but I tried to be around as much as possible, call every night, did homeworks through fax machines in hotels, whatever it took. And, it was just, really proud to watch our girls grow, and 2 of them at Illinois, 1 graduated from Purdue, and now with the grandkids, try to give as much time as we can to them. It's really important to my wife and I to make sure we're part of their life also.
And I'm glad you mentioned some of the realities of coaching and managing a personal life, because is there any downtime? I mean, the summer, you've been talking about all the camps and with recruiting. Do you have an off season?
Well, I used to say I work 342 days a year as a coach, and you got maybe 5, 6 long weekends off. We tried to do little family vacations Thursday through Sunday or Monday morning. I tried to fly back Monday morning so I could be at practice or camp or recruiting or whatever it is. But you give your heart and soul. I don't think people realize I was probably gone maybe half the days of the year, so that made it really, really tough. As far as that goes on my wife, on my family, to be around them. So, for them to have to deal with it. But, my wife, Megan, did an amazing job raising the girls. I really always will appreciate that. And we're proud of the girls. But again, you give your heart and soul. I don't think people realize that. You are human. You have families. When we left Illinois, when we left, SIU, whatever, they were leaving their communities and their friends and people. It's hard. It's not easy, but I think our girls are resilient from that. They've met a lot of different people. I think that's helped them be successful in life. Also, just being around the players from all over the world, literally being around so many people. I think it's helped them adjust and be successful in life.
It definitely seems that way. And as we do to have just a few more minutes together, a couple of quick questions for you. A lot of Illinois fans want to know, do you still have the orange blazer?
I have one of them. I don't know if you remember when I left Illinois, I had 72 orange ties. I signed them all. I sold them for Coaches versus Cancer. We raised, it was well over $25,000 on my ties alone. I sold the one orange jacket that I wore in the national championship game. That went for quite a bit. I have another orange one that I kept. And I just always keep that. I'm sure one of the kids, somebody will want it somewhere down the line. But it's a good memory.
Mm-hmm.
I wore it in the national championship game. We always had pack the whole orange or whatever it was called. And I wore it for that game. And somebody said, "Well, you wear it again?" I said, "If I get to the national championship, I'm going to wear it." Well, we were in the national championship game. I had to have that orange jacket there.
And all of the Illini Nation appreciated it, and it just made everyone smile whenever you did wear it. Let's talk about the best player you've ever coached.
Well, I think I was fortunate to coach Glenn Robinson at Purdue. Big dog. He was the #1 pick in the draft. Just unbelievable player. And, his last, if you look it up, last 7 games at Purdue, he led the country in scoring and in rebounding. And the last 7 games averaged over 40 points a game, which is just incredible. But, right up there, there's no doubt Darren Williams, especially as his success later in the NBA, being an Olympian. Those are 2 of the best guys that I was fortunate in all those years to coach. Just fantastic players and had great careers.
What is one of your most memorable coaching moments that took place outside of an actual game?
I think that I always appreciate, we talked about it off the air a little bit, just all the camps and all the kids that came to camp. At one time, it was over 40,000 kids that came to camp at Purdue when I was there. Illinois, it was, thousands of kids over that 9 years, K-State. But, for me, those are great memories. And then to see those later on, you meet our daughter's babysitter's boyfriend comes to the house and said, "Coach, I went to your camp at, Illinois or at Purdue or wherever it was. And I learned this, or you said that." And those things, to me is special, that like somebody's listening. You always wonder when you say something, is anyone really listening? You got 400 kids playing grab ass at camp on the floor and you're trying to give a lecture, and or somebody listening. And later in life, after that happened, I realized, hey, somebody's listening, and the people that listen actually might learn something, and it's going to help them in the long run. So to me, that makes it all worth it. And everyone's not going to listen and learn, but it's something that I appreciate, and I learn for myself. If you listen, you might actually learn something.
So on that note, with listening and learning, what is the best advice you have ever been given?
Oh, from Coach Katie, to my dad and my wife, just, be true to yourself. Do what you believe in. Don't take the shortcuts. Believe in yourself. I think those things are so, so important, and do things the right way. I mentioned earlier, one of our mottos was act the right way, treat people the right way, and play the game the right way. If you do that, you're going to have success in life. And it's the same thing. And I told our players, I want them to get their degrees. I want them, to have, if they can, live their dream and play in the NBA, play overseas and that. But more importantly, I want them to be, great role models, be great husbands and fathers. And when that happens, then hopefully what you did along their career, you had some impact on their life.
And then back to those players as we wrap up this conversation. When your players think of you years from now, what do you hope that they think?
Well, that I cared about them, but they'd laugh. They talk about it all the time. Did you play for the mean uncle, Coach Weber? Did you play for Daddy, Coach Weber, or the grandpa, Coach Weber? And, each one got a little softer through the years. So when they get together, the Final Fours, you got players from all different eras, and there are coaches somewhere that they're at the Final Four, and they just love to tell stories and, tease me and make fun of me. But, more importantly, that I cared about them. I'm willing to help them, and that I'm still there for them. And I do get calls from guys. Luther Head the other day needed help with something. It's just, if I can help, I will definitely do that and still be part of their life. And that's what I've always tried to promise them.
Coach, we are so thankful that you gave me some help, that you agreed to do this podcast a full hour during March Madness. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was great being on with you. Thank you. And we're cheering for the Illini. We're cheering for the Big Ten. Again, hopefully one of them's cutting down those nets in a couple Mondays.
It will be fun, that's for sure. Friends, until next time, thank you for listening, thank you for learning, and thank you for being live with Laura.